And so when people say I got a story, I'm like, all right, what's your story? And it'll be the hero story, right? Things were okay, then they went really bad, and then I figured it out. I got back up, right? That's the arc of the story. And I'm like, but that's when you tell your story, the goal is to, first of all, is to kind of share, right? That's what we always say, right? Share. And then obviously you want somebody in the audience to empathize and say, wow, look what he did, right? Perfect. Check those two boxes. Here's the problem with this mindset. And this is my perspective. I can be full of it at this point, so you can just turn this off or stop listening. And that is, if the objective really is to help people, then it's not just about telling your story. Are you giving me the tools to work this through? Are you giving me something that's going to help me, or are you just telling your story? Oftentimes, and here's the thing is, even if you tell them how you got through it, just like I'm doing to you, how I tell you, here's how I got through it, I'm just giving you my version of it. That doesn't mean it'll work for you. So unless I can give you real tools to help you through this, then you know what? I'm being an egoist right here, a narcissist, because I just want to tell you my story because I feel like I need to share. Right. What you should feel the need to is help other people with what they're struggling with.
Well, listen, man, we always have, again, the most incredible conversations. And I always think about, man, we always joke, why don't we just record all of these conversations that we have? And we could probably have a bunch of podcasts just backlogged. But because we now have scheduled something, we're actually going to capture the content that we talk about today. How's that sound, man? How's that sound?
Do it. I mean, last time we talked, it ran an hour, I think.
It goes by like
we're just
that.
On the phone. It was like an hour. And it was like, but to me, it wasn't like that. That was a great conversation.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, man. It's like, I think about what we talk about, and then I always go out into the broader picture. I'm like, man, that would have helped some people. So on that same note, what I want to bring back to light, because I do think it's very relevant as far as what we sort of detoured down the other day. And so because of the greatness of what you just said, it was good conversation. Yep. Remember we were talking about this concept of people that were transitioning out of a professional world or a 9-to-5 and they want to go into business.
Yep.
And I said, what they struggle with the most is selling. And you said something to the effect of, well, not really, Manny. What they don't understand is that selling is not an external thing. It's more of an internal thing. And dude, that was so profound that obviously back a couple of days ago, I wrote a bunch of notes, but then I was like, damn, how do I want to talk to him about today? I was like, you know what? I'm going to bring that back to life, because I think people need to really hear and understand this from a level of whatever it is they're trying to accomplish in their life. They need to be sold on themselves internally before they can go out externally and find opportunities and close business or turn that into revenue. So where I'm heading with that, Vic, because you're the wise, genius, older, brilliant, bald-headed, shiny Latin American guy. But I'm just kidding. By the way, everybody, I love this guy. He's been a mentor of mine for some long time. He's been there at every twist and turn. But Vic, where I'm going with that was, let's talk about how we sell ourselves first, and something that we can go through as far as a process or a sequence, so people can be sold on themselves and life before they go out there and create extraordinary opportunities for themselves.
Yeah, and I think it was a good topic, by the way, because I think we consider, to rewind the topic just a little bit for the folks listening or watching, is that we talked about how, I mentioned that everybody sees selling as an external process, something I do to somebody else, which is true. Traditional selling is that. And what I've said is that the first sale you have to make is to sell yourself. So you almost have to treat yourself. It's not that you're going to be schizophrenic or something, but it's almost like you have to have this internal dialogue with yourself, and you have to believe it. And people call that the subconscious, whatever. But at the same time, if you don't sell yourself on the idea that you deserve more or you can have more, you don't go anywhere. It's that simple. Or you just talk yourself out of it. So if you think about it, when we sell something externally to somebody else, the sales process typically is we try to understand the customer, right? One, we try to understand the customer. So let's just one. Number two, we also try to see if it's a match, if it's a fit. Understand the customer, see if it's a fit. And then three, we know that the customer is going to have some objections based on anxiety or fear of why they should or should not make a decision. So let's take the first one, which is to understand the customer. So now let's push it inward, right?
Mhm.
And that's where you got to be honest with yourself. I think this is where people get hung up, is that they're afraid. And we talked about something called mimetics. Mimetics is a science of Jean Girard or some guy like that came up with a book called Mimetics. And mimetics is about you want to be something, not because you want it, because you saw somebody else do it and that's what you want to be. It's basically imitation, right? And we are creatures of imitation. And so when we see somebody, like I saw Zig Ziglar, the speaker, years ago, and I was like, from a mimetic standpoint, I said, I want to be that, right? And so I knew, now let's go to the second part. Understand your customer. Is it a fit? I knew that what he was doing, I couldn't do at the time. There wasn't a fit, right? So I had to join Toastmasters, which is a speaking organization, to learn how to speak, right? And that was scary to get up and do 5-7 minute speeches, start talking. And then over years, I figured it out how to speak. So when people look inwardly, the first question they have to ask themselves is this really what I want to do? Because we've all been there, Manny. We've all done this. We've all done this, me included. You see something, you want it mimetically, right? And you go after it. And then you start doing it, and then something hits you like, damn, I don't really like this.
Yep.
Right? So pause there, right? Everybody, you pause there, and then what do you say to yourself? You go, here I go again. I lost interest, right? And then we start castigating ourselves, right? We're like, I'm such an idiot. I always choose the wrong things. Why do I go down these roads that I know are dead ends? I should have known that this wasn't going to perform. You know what I mean? We beat ourselves up. When in reality, there was nothing wrong with what you actually just did. That was the part of the learning process. You figured out what you didn't want. And the only way to figure out is, my famous line is, to see what's around the corner, you have to walk to the corner.
Interesting.
You can't guess.
Right.
So sometimes we walk down a path, down the street, just to see what's around the corner. Then you go, that's not what I want. So what if we just shifted that one perspective and said, okay, that's not what I want. Boom, figured it out. I don't want that. And you walk away with a positive attitude because you just figured out what you didn't want. You just crossed something out. And right there, that begins the flipping of the mindset instead of castigating yourself. So the first step in the sales process is to know the client, which is you. And you got to go through some of these failures just to figure out what you don't want. The second is, when you think you found something you do want, you got to ask yourself, is it fit? In other words, fast forward what this would look like. I want to be a speaker. That means I got to be on the road a lot. I got to be traveling a lot. There's commitments, time away from family. Got to be honest with myself on that. Is this a fit? To which I said, yes, if I do it the right way. And then the third one is the objections, right? And I was like, how we always do this to ourselves, and you know this already, Manny. We always talk ourselves out of doing something. I always like using the word rationalize, because we have the ability to rationalize to ourselves, right?
Oh, wow.
We lie to ourselves by telling us, maybe I'm just not good. Maybe it won't work. And maybe all speakers don't make a lot of money. And maybe it's just not for me. And you talk yourself out of it just to make you feel better. Then you go back to your 9 to 5. And so when I look at internal selling, to wrap it up, is you got to find a way to sell yourself on the idea. The flip side of all this is you go, oh, speaker, I think I want to be that. Well, 2, is that a fit? Yeah, that's a fit. 3, there are no objections. I think I can do this if I just work hard enough and then become a speaker. And that's what I did. I had to talk myself into it first. Now, once I sold myself on the idea, that was all in. Now, see, that's the key.
Interesting.
All in.
Yeah.
Chips are all in. I pushed them like this, all in.
Right.
And when I knew that it was right for me, it was very easy to push it all in.
So I hear you detail that out, and I think to myself, okay, idea, fit, objection, right? It becomes a process of going inward, asking yourself that thing. Don't you find that there are a lot of different wants, though, based on the nemetics that can cloud and confuse and influence? For example, you wanted to be a speaker, right? Let me pull that back. Yes, I'll leave that. Yes, you did want to be a speaker. Let's look at the landscape of how all the opportunities today are out there, right? Like, you can speak, you can coach, you can be an online course creator, you can be an entrepreneur, you can be a digital marketer, you can be a nomad and travel the world, a freelancer, a videographer. You can be whatever you want to be, right? And for some reason, all of them, as they're presented or pitched, sound exciting. Why? Well, because they're selling you the outcome of that thing, right? And so internally, you're creating a collection of wants almost. And now you're stuck And why I'm saying this is because I've been here, right? It's like I'm the guy. And I'm curious how you say to someone that's going through that process where it's like a buffet of different wants that are in front of you. And you're like, holy crap, which one do I eat? Is your answer like to go through a certain process, or is it all of them? Like what you just said, try it on, walk around the corner, see if you can see something fit. Does it go to your body well, or whatever that process looks like? What do you have to say to that?
There was a time when I was designing, as you know, I got a technical background, so I'm pretty good with technology. And I was like building websites. We're talking, back in the day. And so I was really good at that. I was also good at search engine optimization and search engine marketing. I was also good at that. I was also good at motivational speaking, just fire up a crowd. And then I was also good at sales, right? So I had four wants. And so what I did was I tried each one. Oh, by the way, the fifth one was I loved editing video. Right?
I didn't know that.
That was my thing, right? And so these 5 things were in front of me. And what happened was I started choosing the one I thought was I just picked one, right? Least path of resistance. So I started editing video. And then when I tried to sell like my editing services, I realized it was a hassle dealing with people because I always wanted all these different edits. And you're like, oh, this sucks, right? And so again, I walked down the street, looked around the corner. After I did it for a while, I go, nah, not for me. Okay. But I learned, right?
Sure.
And then I tried website building, same thing. Too many people asking me for different opinions, change this, change that. It was too demanding, right? I don't like that either. The search engine optimization and the web marketing, or just marketing in general, was really good to me. So I still like this one. I enjoyed doing that. But then I did the motivational speaking for a while. So I tried that. And I go, you know what? This isn't fulfilling. And I did that for like 2-3 years, by the way, to figure out it wasn't fulfilling. That's how long I went down. That's how long I walked down that street, if you know what I mean. And then the last one was sales training. So now I narrowed them down to 2. So marketing, internet marketing, online marketing, or sales training. And there I made a decision. Let me go with sales training because I feel like it impact people more and it's more tangible. I kind of walked with it mentally.
Sure.
And I said, well, if I don't, I'll come back to the online marketing. Well, I never looked back because I really enjoyed sales. Right. And I started like just going in. So the answer to the question is, I mean, it's not possible to try everything, but I think if I sat down with anyone, I said, all right, come on, let's narrow it down to the top 3. You can give me the top 3, right?
Yeah.
And in that top 3, we can try 3. And you just pick one, try it, and you got to be honest with yourself. It's not working for me. I don't like this. All right, next. But again, I go back to my original point. You don't castigate yourself. You go, I just checked something off. Now I can move on. And I love that mindset.
You're talking about self-talk, obviously, right?
Yeah. That's self-talk where you're like, instead of saying, I'm an idiot, why did I do this? I knew I shouldn't have started this. And the thing is, you flip that. You go, well, what did I learn? I learned this is what I like, this is what I don't like. For example, in the editing and on the web design, I learned I don't like doing things for people that they can keep coming back, because web design, right, is an art. Video editing is an art. I realize I don't like subjective matters where people can have all varying opinions and there is no template, no straight line. Sales training is a very straight line. Here's how you close the deals. Here's how you approach the client, and so forth and so on.
And you can measure it.
Yes. Yes, correct. So these are the things you work through in your head. So there is no easy answer to try it and see what works for you.
So, okay. I'm at home this morning, and because I'm going in the direction of the self-talk, because I know that a lot of people deal with this. And I love, again, our conversations always naturally lead somewhere when we're not doing this. And where you end up going are what I now feel are the depths of the depths, because you're a deep thinker and you like that type of thought in a world where there's a lot of surface, top level. Let me tell you what the rah-rah reread thing is. And people like that. And they're watching that 60-second short. In opposition, you're the complete opposite. You're going and planting your flag deep into the core of the earth of the content itself. And so why I'm saying that is because this morning I get a text message from my lady, and she sends me this video of Joe Dispenza in an interview. Now, I'm not sure if you're a fan of his or not. Are you familiar with his work?
Yeah, I like his stuff. I like his content. I think it's great.
Yeah.
The stuff I've watched, I I mean, he goes deep. He goes deep. You know what I mean? And so I really enjoy his talks. Very intellectual.
Totally. Right. And so and what I've found out of his work too is that it's easy to digest and understand. Right. So where I'm going with that is, you know, I've watched his stuff numerous times, and he's very big on, it's the best way to put it, the quantum field, right? And the idea that the thought cascades down into, and then it creates the emotion. And if you're living from a being of the past and you remember that more, you're going to keep perpetuating your past. And so this one this morning talked a lot about basically remembering too much of who you used to be and thinking that you're guilty or ashamed or worthless. And because you constantly repeat that thought and that emotion to yourself, you don't even realize that you are in fact that person at that point, which means like you're internally, emotionally feeling guilty all the time. You're emotionally, internally feeling like a worthless POS all the time. However, you're unaware of that. But that's how you keep creating the same situation, because you don't know how to, in his case, as he says, Vic, separate from what's the familiar and to the unknown, which is the discomfort, right? So, and then he tied it to survival and like living in that place of fear and concern, and then you can't create when you're in that environment. So now I'm passing the baton back to you in that same conversation and saying, well, what's your take on that attitude of when people beat themselves up or self-loathe or don't basically give themselves enough credit in those situations? Because that is a seriously big problem nowadays where people, and by the way, I go through this at times too, actively now, right? So it's like an effort and a practice, but I'm curious on your very thoughtful take on that, because I know you'll have one.
Yeah, I wrote an article not too long ago. It's called From Bully to Buddy, right? And bear with me, I'm going in, I'll tie it back to what you just asked me. And I tell the story about how 20 years after my graduation from high school, I get invited to go do a keynote there, right? Now, I got to rewind the tape, man. I was that tall, lanky, skinny, awkward-looking kid in high school.
With hair.
I wasn't the toughest kid. Almost everybody could kick my ass, right? And I remember this one guy. I call him Mike. That's not his real name. But he was always like, just messing with me all the time, right? Just a bully. You know what I mean? And it wasn't so much physical as it was verbal all the time, trying to embarrass me, just always on me. You know what I mean? And I was like, one of the good things about leaving high school was I never had to see that guy again, right? And so fast forward 20 years later, I'm doing my speech, right? So I get to the high school. We're in Chicago. And I remember walking, and I know where the auditorium is at, right? I still remember that. And I'm walking towards the auditorium, and all of a sudden, I see a guy coming down the hallway. It's the custodian, right? He's coming down my way, and I'm not paying attention, but then he starts saying, "Hey, Victor." And I look up. He goes, "Hey, Victor." I said, like, how does he know my name? And I look closely, and it's him. Wow. He's the custodian for the high school, right? And he's like, "Victor, heard you're going to be here, man. Super excited. So proud of you. Blah, blah. Flowers. Giving me flowers, right? Throwing flowers at me, right? And then he starts telling me about his family. He starts telling me this and that. He said, "Let me just walk you through the backside, in case you forgot." I'm like, "Okay." And he's just like, and I'm still like not processing this the right way, because I'm like, but you're the, in my head, you're the ass that I used to deal with years ago, right? And I remember, I don't know what the exchange was, but then I just go inside, get ready, eventually get on stage, right? I get on stage, hit the front of the stage, and I'm talking to the students, and off to the side on the wall, I can see him leaning on the wall with the biggest Cheshire smile grin I've ever, the Cheshire cat, the big grin, just almost like a proud father watching his kid on stage. And I'm looking at this off the side, according to that, I go, "What the hell?" And it took me a while to process this, but here's what I've concluded from that. In my mind, because I left him at 18, and let's say I did the speech at 45, I don't remember really, I kept that same photo of him in my head. Never swapped the photo out. See, the thing is, 20 years later, that guy had changed, but yet I still had the same Polaroid picture in my head of who he was, which means I've been carrying around the wrong image all these years. I kept them in the 18-year-old context, and here's a 40, 45-year-old man, totally different context now, right? And then I started thinking about this. I said, why do we do this? Because we now carry to your question, this whole thing about living with the past, we carry this Polaroid of what we used to be. And our formative years, which begin somewhere around, I don't know, the age of 7 to maybe 15, 16, 17, up to 18, are very formative. In other words, impactful years. I always like to look at those times. I always look at that time frame as wet cement time. By wet cement time is, you put your fingerprints in the wet cement, it's imprinted for a long time. And that's wet cement period right there, right? And so fast forward, we're 45 now, let's say, and we're still living the context we used to live. We still think we're the same people, and we're not. And the brain is a funny thing because there's something called memory distortion. I think memory distortion is fascinating. They did a study with 9/11, right? 1 week after 9/11, 2 weeks after 9/11, they asked people, where were you when the 2 planes hit the tower in 2001? People gave their statements, right? Then about, I think it was 5 years later, same people, they asked them again, 5 years later, tell me the story. Where were you after 9/11? And the story changed about like 20, 25%, like that, right? Then like 10 years later, 15 years later, I forget the number, it changed like, I think 35 to 40% from the original story. So in other words, every time we go back, we distort memory. In other words, every time we recall something, we're distorting it to some extent because we're looking at that picture back in the past through the current context. And so memory distortion is interesting because you ever have a situation, Manny, where you did something embarrassing, right? At a party.
Oh, yeah.
You said something stupid. Yeah. I've done it. We've all done it, right? You're like, oh, why did I say that? Oh, why did I do that? That whole thing, right? And then you run into a friend 10 years later and you bring it up. And he's like, I don't really remember that. Now, you carried that memory for 10 years and you've been beating yourself up for 10 years and the other person doesn't even remember it. So to your point is that we distort our history so much so that it impacts who we are today.
Yeah.
Because every memory you have in your head, I guarantee you, is not 100% correct. It's been proven.
Right.
Your memories are always distorted. So if you distort them negatively, because what we tend to do is we amplify the negative and dampen the positive. Let me say that again, because people need to hear that.
Yeah.
We tend to amplify the negative. Oh, I'm such an idiot. Why did I do that? But when you do something well, you're like, yeah, good. And you just dampen it. Yeah. And that's where some of that distortion comes from. We don't give ourselves enough credit for what we've done right.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think, outside of the nature of the mind on the negative, and where, for example, media thrives because it's all fear-based and it's concerning and it's like an instant attraction to how the mind works. Why do you think there is an amplification there? Do you have a direction on the brain science there? Because again, I know you're well-read.
I think, when you look at the amygdala, right? The amygdala is that the reptilian brain, the oldest part of the brain, right? 30, 40 million years old, right? And that's where 3 things live: fight, flight, or freeze. The third one most people don't talk about, right? And when you do something and it's embarrassing, I think it hits that part. And that part has a way of imprinting deeper into the cement than anything else. When you do something positive, you're like, right? But when something negative happens, it's embarrassing, right? And that embarrassment, remember, that embarrassment just it puts like an emotional tag in your brain. And that's why I think we remember it. And that's as far as I can go with the neurological side of it. But I think it's very fascinating how we still hold images of who we were and we haven't updated. It's almost like we don't update our operating system.
Yeah.
We're still like working with old software. And I think if people learn to kind of update their operating system, can I tell you this quick story? Because I think this is really fascinating.
Please.
So at the age of 50, and I wrote a book about this called The Greatest Gift. I gave myself the greatest gift at the age of 50. I think I told you this. And that is, at the age of 50, I told myself that from this day forward, I can no longer think about mistakes I made in the past or castigate myself for them. And I called it erasing the board. So it's almost like all these stupid mistakes were written on a board. I just erased the board. And at 50, I started fresh. And if you're listening to this right now, why don't you just say, today's the day I'm just going to erase the board. All the screw-ups, all the mess-ups I've done, just erase it, start fresh. And what I've done is that every time I think about something negative, I go, wait a minute, was that before I was 50? And the answer comes back, yes, that doesn't count. Because we drew the line. We erased the board. And you'd be amazed how positive that is. Yeah. It's been a positive influence in my life ever since I've done that, man.
It's funny, you almost read my mind, because I was going to actually reference the point where you called it your woes bag. Drop your woes bag. with me. Do you remember that?
Yeah, your bag of woes, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you carry all around these, it's like a sack, like Santa Claus, right? Except you don't have gifts. You have woes, all the mistakes, all the screw-ups, all the mess ups you've done. And people do that. And sometimes I think we hang on to these bag of woes because we like this victim mindset.
That's a fantastic point, man. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to say something there because that was going to be my next direct place to go. Yeah. Like, okay, so I'm listening to you. Easy for you to say, Vic. Yeah, you just said, okay, I'm going to stop carrying around things that have happened before 50. Okay, and so when it happens and I think about it, I just stop doing it. Even me, like as I continue to drop the woes, right? Just like, hey, leave them behind me. It's almost like it's too good to be true type of thing when I hear like, there's no way he just says that to himself and it's that easy. When other people are out there, it seems like fighting for their life to try to get rid of the old things like that. And so that begs the question from me to you of, is it really that simple? And if it is, why aren't more people, again, let's just assume like what they just heard, okay, great. They still won't go do it or allow that to become their reality because you make it sound so easy. And I get it. I understand. I hear you. Yeah. But for them to sustain that and then make their new reality come true, I feel that if that was the answer, then more people would be severely more at peace, happier, and living a better life than they are today. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree. And I would never pretend to offer a panacea. By that, I mean to say, all right, I found the ultimate solution to your problems. Erase the board. Just make the day. All I can say is, and I think this is interesting because I think when people like myself or anybody else get on a microphone, a conversation like this, we have to remind the listeners or the viewers, this is my perspective, my life, my context. Mm-hmm. Yours might be totally different. You might have gone through some traumatic experience that that erasing the board ain't going to work, to which I sympathize, if not empathize, and I get it. Oh. So I'm just giving you, I hate to use this phrase because it sounds so Oprah Winfrey-like, because it's like, I'm just giving you my truth, what works for me. And what it does work for me because I go, that was before I was 50. Why am I still punishing myself? And see, that's the line I use internally.
Ooh, that's good.
Why am I still punishing myself for something that happened before I was 50? Let's stop doing that because there's no benefit to it. Because remember, I'm also selling myself. Let's go back to the original point. I'm selling myself. I said, wait a minute. So I got to sell myself. I said, that was then. This is now. It's a new context. I think differently. I understand things differently. I'm a little older. I'm a little wiser. Why am I going to drag that? I mean, I actually have these arguments in my head with myself. I said, why am I dragging that over the 50-year line anymore? Makes no sense. Makes no sense, right? Yeah. And so I leave it in the past. And so that's why has been, I don't know how to define the word easy. I mean, I'll just say it's required a little effort, but not a lot. And it's worked for me. And so every time I do that, was that before 50? Yeah, you don't count that. Yep. And then what happens is the flip side kicks in, which is a positive. So now anything after 50, not a lot of screw-ups actually. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And not a lot of regret because, I'm a little wiser now. So now I'm living in a more positive, I guess, era of my life because I'm not carrying the bag of woes. And so anybody who holds on to these bag of woes, again, there's going to be a certain percent of people who've gone through some traumatic experience that, years of therapy probably won't clarify. But at the end of the day, depending on which philosopher you want to believe, you have to make a choice, man. You have to make a choice. Can I continue to let something that happened 20 years ago continue to impact me? And if the answer is yes, then you're done for the rest of your life to some extent, right? Yeah. You let them win. Yeah. If somebody did something to you 20 years ago and you're still holding on to that, I'm not saying it's not traumatic. I'm not trying to discount that at all. I'm just saying, how much longer are we letting them win? Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's a hard one to answer because I like to say it's worked for me. Sure. Because again, and maybe because I'll say my traumas, from 50 before, my mistakes, my errors weren't really that bad. Sure. One could argue that they weren't that bad. So therefore, that's why it's easy for me to go, that was youth, that was stupidity, let it go. Yeah. I don't know if I answered the question, but that's the best way.
I think what you said about this is my perspective, this is how it has helped me is what matters because, of course, it's not black or white as far as what I've discovered. Yeah. What I do think about a lot, it's interesting because I've bought into this concept of you got to share your story, right? And if you got a story, that's kind of what got me into this whole journey to begin with, man. I don't know if I ever told you that. I'm sure you heard it at some point, but after my sobriety, I started going to the events. I'd go see Les and I'd go see all these other big names. And I was like, man, they always told me this whole, if you got a story, you got to tell your story. That's why I got to get out there and do something. And now I'm at this point where I share it, right? I talk about it. And I talk about my accident and when I was in that car wreck when I was 5 and I got basically killed and, I was out for days and how that affected me. And kind of goes and ties back to the whole thing of when we're talking about Joe Dispenza, like the memory of the past, right? You're constantly replaying this thing. And so I'm replaying this thing. I'm talking about it as part of my story. And now I'm at this place where it's this kind of fork in the road where it's like, how much energy do I put into that to talk about the fact that it affected me? Because here's what I actually go through and have caught myself on several occasions going through is reminding myself that doesn't help me, but I have a lot of very real traumatic images and thoughts around that because it was so important and powerful and just direct hit, quote unquote. And so I would love to say, you know what, I just could care less, but it just doesn't work that way for me, Vic. It literally creeps in on its own. It literally comes in and just sneaks up on me. And it's like, here's an image of something hitting you at full speed. I'm like, whoa, shit, okay. Can't keep having that happen, but I don't have control of that. It's like, all right, well, I can talk to you about it. It's not going to happen. Don't live that way. So when you say
I suggest something? Because I think this is important to interject this is that, and I'll try to phrase this in a very nice way because I don't want to be too hard with this one. If you're focused on the past, that means you got nothing in front of you to look forward to. There's nothing pulling you into the future.
Wow.
That's the problem.
Sure.
The thing is, I don't like sharing my story. I really don't. If you watch my keynote speeches, I rarely talk about, Puerto Rican kid, inner city, in the hood. I mean, I got drug stories. I got murder stories. I got stories, right? Of all these things. And people always ask me, why don't you tell your story? And I'm like, because everybody has a story. To some extent, everybody has a story. It's just to varying degrees of stories, right? And so I don't like telling the story because, every time I hear people say, I have a message, I have a story and a message to share with the world, to me, I'm like, shut up. Because to me, that's almost, it's narcissistic to some point because you have a story. Look, there's people starving in other countries right now, India, Africa. Oh, hell, they have a story. Right. And so when people say I got a story, I'm like, all right, what's your story? And, it'll be, the hero story, right? Things were okay. Then they went really bad. And then I figured it out. I got back up. Right. That's the arc of the story. And I'm like, but that's when you tell your story, the goal is to, first of all, is to kind of share, right? That's what I always say, right? Share. And then obviously you want somebody in the audience to empathize and say, wow, look what he did, right? Perfect. Check those 2 boxes. Here's the problem with this mindset. And this is my perspective. I could be full of it at this point, so you can just turn this off or stop listening. And that is, if the objective really is to help people, then it's not just about telling your story. Are you giving me the tools to work this through? Are you giving me something that's going to help me, or are you just telling your story? Oftentimes, and here's the thing is, even if you tell them how you got through it, just like I'm doing to you, how I tell you, here's how I got through it. I'm just giving you my version of it. That doesn't mean it'll work for you. So unless I can give you real tools to help you through this, then you know what? I'm being an egoist right here, a narcissist, because I just want to tell you my story because I feel like I need to share.
Right.
What you should feel the need to is help other people with what they're struggling with. And I also think that when you share your story, too often we tend to separate ourselves from the audience. We always talk about how we connect with the audience, but nobody ever talks about the disconnect piece. Because if I don't have similar experiences and I didn't go through that, like for example, if I can use sobriety as an example, if I didn't have that, I can't relate. If I didn't have a drinking issue, I can't relate. If I didn't have a drug problem, I can't relate.
Right.
And so that also that's something we don't talk about in the world of speaking, is that when you do share your story, you also kind of isolate a few people out because they go, I can't relate. When I do corporate events and I'm training, let's say it's sales training, B2B, high-tech, long sales cycle deals. And I go up there and I try to tell my story about being raised in the hood. I can tell you for a fact,
Oh,
10% might even understand what I'm saying. The other 90%, I'm like, oh, why is he here?
Sure.
Because my job is to deliver value when I get there. So if you're going to share your story, I'd rather you say to me that instead of sharing your story, I said, I bring a set of tools to help people overcome X, whatever's holding them back. I go, okay, that I can respect.
Right.
But when I hear people say, I want to share my story, I'm like, it means nothing to me.
Sure. Yeah.
But if you give me tools, I want to listen to you, man. I want to listen to you.
Yeah, and total respect for the answer there too. And I didn't say that from like I live in the storytelling part if I'm there to deliver value. Like, look, we spoke together at the conference last summer in Scottsdale. I didn't have really, more than a couple minutes about my story. I say that more from the perspective of me telling myself that, which is like, oh shoot, I think I caught myself in a trap. And it reminds me of another friend of mine that sent me a message. After
Manny, if I may interrupt,
please.
I just want to say you aren't your story though. Your story happened 20 years ago, man. My hood story was in this case almost 60 years ago story, right? Yeah. It was way back then. That's not me anymore. That's not my story. Why am I holding on to a story? Look, if I don't have any new stories, that's kind of sad.
Right.
If I'm still talking about stories that happened around when I was 20, that's kind of sad.
Yeah.
It's powerful. Because I'm like, that's not my story anymore. It's what Dispenza's saying. It's like, you're changing over time. Your context is changing over time. So therefore, if your context is changing, why don't you change your content? Why are we reaching back to the past? And I would argue that the reason you're reaching back to the past is because you don't have a compelling future. Something you're reaching for in the future. Because if you said to me today, Victor, I really want to do this, all of a sudden your brain goes, and I can focus on getting that.
Yeah.
But if I'm always trying to, it's almost like if you're walking, but you keep looking back. You keep looking back. Why not just keep looking forward to whatever the next thing is? And so I think to come out of some of these traumas, I think you have to put something big in front of you that is so compelling that, it could be a cause. It could be, working with a nonprofit. It could be something, building a business, something that's so compelling that all of a sudden it creates a whole new story. I mean, isn't that what we want to create? So when somebody says I have a story 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I don't care. I'm just like, dude, tell me what's, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's that mindset.
Where are you going? Where are you going now? Where are you going next?
Tell me that's what I want to know. When I hear people and they're like, all right, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm like, oh yeah, I lean into that because I'm like, that's what they're trying to do. And I want to hear that. What you're doing right now, tell me about your trials and tribulations so I can avoid some of those potholes and, celebrate some of the victories. But this whole thing about reaching back to your story, remember, it's not the same context, but yet you still want to use the same content.
Sure.
And I think that in itself is a problem.
And if I've to sort of summarize it, maybe it's causing a trap, right? Maybe it's trapping you from making the forward progress you want and or not even ever having a chance to get there or slowing it down to some extent.
You're scared. By the way, not you. I'm saying
No, even if you're talking to me, by the way, I'm cool with it because I'm giving you the truth of some of the things I go through. Yeah, man. Like
you're scared.
We've been jamming for a long time. I don't not take action and I don't do things. That's obvious. But I do believe.
But there's that fear is always pulling you back to the comfortable.
You're damn
right.
We
all fight that, by the way. I fight that.
Yeah.
Literally today, Manny, I'm reading a book. So I won't tell you the title because I felt like throwing the book out the window. After I bought the book, it's something about, it's one of those do better books.
By the way, what's your book rule again? You have a book rule you told me about. Come on, you got to share it.
My book rule is if after the first 100 pages it doesn't interest me, I get rid of the book.
Yeah,
I throw it away. By throw it away, I mean I give it to Goodwill or take it over to the local library and give it away.
Smart.
And so this one made like maybe 40 pages. And the reason I didn't like the book, man, because it was a raw book, and it was selling. I always say there's two people you should look out for: poverty pimps and profit pimps. Right?
Okay.
Those are two people you should look out for. Poverty pimps always want to talk about how you're being held back and how everybody owes you something, right? In the meantime, these people are making money off of you, holding you back. If you know what's holding you back. In other words, come to me because I can help you with what's holding you back. Profit pimps are people who said, the get rich quick schemes.
Yeah.
And this one fell on the profit pimp category. because there was no context. It was all these platitudes about how wonderful you can do these things, how fast it can go. And the thing is, when you tell somebody, look, I'm making $1 million, $5 million, $10 million, right? You can too in 2 years. And I fire you up and I take your money, right? Give you the plan, take your money, right? And then what happens? Fast forward 2 years later, if that, 1 year later, maybe you walk down to the street, looked around the corner, you're like, I can't do this, right? And then you feel like a failure, right?
Yep.
Well, that other guy did it. Why can't I do it?
Right.
Why couldn't I do it? He did it. He gave me the roadmap. Why did he do it? Why couldn't I? And then we feel more defeated.
Yeah.
Because somebody actually gave us a roadmap and we still couldn't execute on it, right? Right? Logical, right? But here's the problem with that line of thinking. You shouldn't beat yourself up. Here's why. Because I'm telling you, I've been around the block just too many times. When I interview people, when I talk to them, I drill down to, okay, I got the blueprint, but walk me through what really happened. And I'm telling you, in many cases, what happened to them, how they got to the next level, how they got the big check was actually more nuanced than they wanted to admit. In other words, there was more things that happened. And there were things that are not duplicatable that happened to that person that would never happen to you. I mean, the chances are almost impossible, right? And they don't tell you that. Right? Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Outliers. Outliers is one of the best books on sales / motivation / success. Read the book because in there he talks about the outlier effect of how if this didn't happen, Oprah wouldn't have been here. If this didn't happen, Steve Jobs wouldn't have been there. And again, but if you listen to the documentaries or watch documentaries, they're like, she struggled, she overcame adversity, all that stuff, right?
Yep.
But they don't tell you, wait a minute. At that time, there wasn't a lot of competition.
Yep.
If I were to take Oprah today, Oprah minted back in the 80s, take her and drop her into today's society, I'm willing to bet she wouldn't be as successful. Not because she's not talented, but because there's more competition.
Yep.
Social media, all this stuff. It's harder, right? So in other words, the context has changed. All this to say is that when you try something and it doesn't work out and you look at somebody else, because our brain does that, we always compare ourselves to somebody else. Again, what happened to them was probably something that can't be duplicated.
Yeah.
You have to figure out your own success, man.
I remember that conversation very vividly when we were talking about that. And I shared with you the different times in my life that were related to what you just said with an outlier that I don't necessarily think are duplicatable. One of them being meeting you and you, in essence, taking me under your wing. Now, granted, you could have a bunch more of me and I don't know about it, but I really believe that me getting brought in to go travel with Bill, that's another one. Me going to work at Brad's place and then running the celebrities, like I had moment after moment after moment where it kept happening. And I do believe those are outliers, right? Because it's like how I can't teach that. I can tell you what I did. Hey, I sent a DM to this guy. Hey, when I met you, somebody else had a platform and they had me interview you, right? Like that is that transferable? Well, I guess you can say in the modern day, you can say, hey, send a DM to Vic and see if Vic. I called you Vic. More of my funny words that come out, man.
Sorry.
And so I do believe there's a level of profoundness, which is why when I have more dialogues, I'm always so curious about that, like going deeper, because it's such a good point. It's like, no. What are you covering up? What are you holding back in there, right? What's the real,
there's something in the back. I think, the term today that people throw around is like white privilege, right? And I go, I don't like the phrase, but I do like the word privilege, right? Because I like to deracialize it, because what happens is there are people who are born into privilege.
Yeah.
And by the way, when I say born into privilege, I'm not even talking, I mean, Michael Jordan was born into privilege. Here's what I mean. You don't grow that tall and have a vertical that high jumping. You know what I mean? There's some gifts there that God just gave you, right? Yep. That's privilege. If somebody's born tall, right, has the Adonis look, perfect face, perfect jaw, the whole bit. Okay, again, there it is, right? That's I think it's called a halo effect, right? And the media, people look up and say, "Oh, you belong on a magazine." Well, he was born with a privilege. Same if it's a beautiful woman and born with privileges. So people are born with privileges. Life is not fair, right? Yeah. And so when I hear the word, I like to use the word privilege because some people are born privileged. Like, in other words, you may have been born into a family that already had money, or your mother or your father were already professionals. They were
Mhm.
doctors, they were surgeons, whatever it may be. Well, that's a point of privilege, right?
Yep.
So there's all kinds of people who've gotten head starts over us. I like to say that the only privilege I had was one of adversity.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that was the only privilege I had. One of
man.
it, that as they say, what's that phrase? The advantage of adversity, right? Because when you get your ass kicked a lot, you just become a little more tempered about things. So maybe that was an advantage, right? That was my privilege. And so the reason I joke about the word white privilege, because I don't know why people throw the word white in there, because it isn't about race. It's really about the situation you were brought into and the attributes, the physical attributes you were given. Those are also privilege, right?
Yeah.
And so putting that aside, if we just defocus on privilege, you say, okay, maybe I wasn't born handsome and tall, right? I didn't have this gift, that gift. All right. I'm telling you, everybody has a set. Everybody has a set. You just have to find out, where does this set work best for me, that puts me in a situation where I now have privilege and an advantage. And I think that's the mind shift, right? I tried to play basketball. I couldn't jump high, right? So I think that was one of my biggest debilitating effects of playing basketball. So I had to give that up. I wanted to play bass guitar. I think I was pretty good, but I wasn't the best. I just couldn't get it. I got this double jointed pinky finger that won't let me move up and down the fretboard that quickly. I knew I couldn't be fast. And I'm like, well, that's not going to help. And so I can tell you about all my things that I tried. I'm not good at it. I'm not good at it, until I said, and then when I came across speaking, I'm like, damn, I'm good at that. Oh, okay, I'm good at this. Finally, it's like, oh, I'm good at something. Here it is. And so my point is that we all have something. I know it sounds kind of trite, but I think we all have some gifts, right? Scott, who's running the board right now, he's probably the ultimate nerd for all I know, right? And he just loves everything technical, right? Everything that's audio, visual, and putting it all together is just his thing, man. He eats a cereal and he's editing at the same time. For all I know, that's his thing. I could never do that, but that's his gift. That's his privilege.
Yeah. We were just talking about that.
Yeah. It's all something. Everybody has something. And I think in the book by what's his name? James Clear wrote the book Atomic Habits, all right? And he talked about a guy in there, the guy who became the director of the bicycling team or cycling team for Britain, right? The UK. His name is Dave Brailsford. And he came up with this concept called the aggregation of marginal gains. And the way they started winning, because they never won a Tour de France. They just never qualified. They were so horrible that bike manufacturers actually begged them not to use their bikes during competition because they didn't want to be associated with them. That's how bad they were. So Dave Brailsford comes in. He says, hey, let's try this thing. It's called the aggregation of marginal gains. And what is it? Is that we look for small pieces of improvement that over a while accumulate. The aggregation of these small marginal gains. For example, he said, hey, let's rub alcohol on the tires so they'll stick better. We have more grip when we're racing. Let's bring somebody's mattress if they want when they're going to a different hotel so they can sleep better. Brought mattresses. All these little things they started doing that began to add up, right? And I've always loved that concept because in today's market, there are no big hits. See, this is what the profit pimps will tell you. Yeah, you could just do it. It isn't the one-shot step function you get there. But what if you just start doing all these little 1% improvements? And then over time, those 1% improvements is what even the Outlier book talks about, pushes you in front of everybody else. And everybody can improve that 1% every day.
Yeah, you that triggers a thought for me back to you of people don't have impulse control. They want it now, right?
Yeah.
Which
gratification,
which is difficult for most people because they're unwilling to do what it takes day after day without seeing some fruit of their labor right now. And they abort and go to something else as if it will change that. And they're always looking for the one thing that's going to be the lottery pick, right? Or the jackpot. And so they bypass the strength training that they go through or need to go through in order to accomplish the thing. That's exact. By the way, that happened with me with this podcast. I realized at the beginning of the year, podcasting was a big deal. I had been flirting with it. I did one randomly and I was like, oh, let's do a podcast. Let's do one every other couple months. When I find somebody, I'll just interview them and I'll throw it up there. Then I was like, I started doing some research more and I started watching people who were good at it and had built some great big communities and brands out of it. And I realized that the one thing they all said was the moment I decided to do this consistently is when everything changed. And I was like, shit. I just need to start doing it consistently. Yeah, that was it.
You can't get away from it.
You can't.
The thing is, as soon as you say all in, as soon as you push the chips all in, when you find your thing, right? You find it, you push it all in, then you're like, Then it's just doing it.
That's exactly
And then
it.
just doing it consistently over time. And I think that's where, even if you push your chips all in, I'm going to repeat this message for the third time. Even if you push your chips all in, and after you push them in, a year later, you find out, I don't like it. It's okay, man.
Yeah.
It's okay. You just learned something that you don't like that.
Right.
Too many people sit back thinking about what they want to do and never try anything. And so I think the biggest graveyard, they always say, is that on your desk, right? That's where all the ideas go. They're written down and they die right there.
I heard that one. That's funny.
Yeah. Nobody ever executes on them.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I remember the first several weeks where I was like, consistency, weird, awkward. And then a month and a half, 2 months in, it just became automatic with this. I was like, okay, got to get up, got to go do the thing. If I know I need an episode out the next week, it's like, whatever it takes. Got to go through the process of getting the show notes and the writings done, the descriptions for the tube and podcast write-ups. It's like, all right, well, it's just another day. Let's go, Yeah. And you trust the fact that in 5 years, like you got to be willing to play that game, right? You've been doing your podcast for how long now? Jesus.
Oh man, I started the sales influence. I staked my claim in 2008.
2008.
April 2nd, 12:03 a.m. 2008. Because I wrote it down. I made a little contract with myself, and so I still have that contract downstairs. And I said, all right, from this day forward, we talk about sales and influence.
Yeah,
that's it. And then the podcast maybe came, I don't know, like 5-7 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I've been doing it that long. And so, but we have, like, you know this already, I got over like 1,600 videos on YouTube because I'm like constantly cranking stuff out, right? And that's been, again, it has, if you saw my first video, by the way, Manny, it's really funny because I used somebody's office with a board and I did it with my laptop. And I'm actually holding my laptop as I'm filming.
Oh, that's hysterical. That's great.
Because my favorite saying is never aim for perfection, aim for success. In other words, don't wait for conditions to be perfect because they never really are. I'm the 80% guy. If it's 80%, dude, let's do it. Let's launch.
Absolutely.
That's why I could never be a rocket scientist because 20% off would be a lot.
Fails. Yeah.
Elon Musk would never hire me.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
No, man, what you've done is the perfect example of playing the long game, right? I mean, you've got two of the largest platforms in sales, both on the podcast and YouTube, and that is literally the fuel for all of your business, which is a beautiful thing now. I think about, we've just kind of covered a bunch of parameters there from the, kind of like the story we tell ourselves. Tell your story. And so I kind of pivoting off that. One thing, in case you didn't highlight it really quickly, though, I kind of want to, you said something in there where you said you got to kind of find your set, right? Your gift. Yeah. And did you like indirectly cover what would be, or does it connect back to the kind of earlier, very first part of today when we talked about you got to go out and just try the thing to figure out what your gift is, Vic? Is that the same recipe there? Because when you said you got to find your gift, I just want to make sure we don't overlook the kind of the approach to discover the gift.
It's interesting. When I first started out, I would see these guys, gals, doesn't matter, right? And I would say, look at them, on stage, right? How'd they get there, right? Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I wonder what it's like to be them, right? What is it like to be them, right? Fast forward, I find myself now in that situation where people look up at me and it goes, oh, I wonder what it's like to be him. Well, now I can actually tell you the answer. Yeah. The answer is it felt no different than when I first started out because it's not like something magical happens when you're at this level. There's that phrase, it's an infinite game. Yeah. There is no end game unless you want to retire, then that's an end game. But I mean, if you enjoy what you do like I do, I don't plan to retire soon. And so for me, I just realized that it's a lot of work, Manny. We see the glamour side. I'll just talk about speaking because that's what I know mostly, is that we see the side of speaking. They're on stage. They're receiving all the accolades, right? They're getting paid a lot of money. They're selling books. Everybody wants to take a picture of them, blah, blah, blah. What I now know is that what everybody else doesn't see, and every other speaker knows, is that, dude, it's the getting to the airport, sitting there, flights canceled again. Luggage lost. I got to run to Walmart to buy a cheap suit, right? Or I'm away from my family. Oh, I got this lousy hotel. Who would put me in this lousy hotel? Damn it, the air conditioning is not working. Man, is there any food around here? God, I ate something bad. I'm starting to puke in the room and nobody's around to help me. You know what I mean? All these things. it's not the glamorous side of speaking, but it's the reality of speaking. And when you go through that process, you realize there's nothing special. If you idolize somebody today, it could be Taylor Swift for all I care, right? Beyonce, take your pick. Pick somebody you idolize. I'm telling you right now, they're just like you. They go through the same things just like you. And you know what? They have a lot of money more than you. But you know what? They can only eat 3 meals a day. Last time I checked, they don't really want to overdo that, right? You can only live in one room at a time, or one house at a time. Can't do 2 at a time, right? You have to go to the bathroom just like the rest of us. You know, that always reminded me to humble people. I always had that visual in my head. Early on, I always thought about people sitting on the throne in the bathroom. And it made them not intimidating to me for some reason. And you realize, yeah, I know, I've done that. Yeah, because when you do that, I've met, you know, like next week I'll be on stage and hanging out with John Maxwell, right? Now, I've met him before. We did a small interview. And when I talk to him, I just talk to him. You know what I mean? Like, hey, John, what's up? You know, respectful, of course. You know, Les Brown, same thing. What's up, Les? Love your stuff. You know, and then it's just a conversation. And I think the reason I bring that up is that because we think they have special powers. They don't, man. They have a gift, right, that they've worked on. And I like to believe that that gift is something that they worked on. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Rare is the person just kind of just says, hey, I can speak and here it is. If you look at some of these speakers who are really good, the number of years that they spend practicing the craft. Like, for example, I forgot who the preacher's name is, but I realized, oh, he's the son of a pastor. Which means he grew up what? That's right. Since the age of 4 or 5, and listening to his father preach. So by the time he hit 18, 20, of course he's going to be a monster, right? Again, privilege, right? Totally. And so everybody has, but even that privilege only gets you so far. You still have to work it, right? And so I think everybody has that gift. Everybody has something. The tough part is figuring it out. And then, but you got to recognize, and this is going to sound so cliche, you got to recognize the gift in its raw form. That's the key. You got to recognize the gift in its raw form. In other words, when I first started speaking, like if you go online right now, you type in Victor Antonio's first Toastmaster speech. Oh, dude, I look good, but I was horrible speaking, right? But I was like, wait a minute, I think I got something here. I think I got something. Right. I mean, nobody else recognizes it, can see it yet, but I'm going, I think I got an unpolished diamond here, right? Yeah. That's what I mean. You got to recognize it before it becomes the actual gift. The gift is what everybody else sees once it's polished. They go, oh my God, look at the shine on this guy, right? But you got to learn to recognize your talent in its raw form. And how do you recognize the talent? You recognize that talent and you go, I kind of like doing this. You got that little voice sneaks in your head. I kind of like doing this. It's kind of fun. Yeah. I wonder if I could make money at this. Could you make a living at this? Yeah. And then you start asking people, can you make money at speaking? Yeah. Can you make a living? I think I could be good at this. Yeah. That little voice conversation, recognition of a gift in its raw form. Yeah. Oh, that's what you're looking for, man. So everybody has that. And it's like it's like the parable of talents in the Bible, right? You just got to kind of, there's some people who will bury their talents and some people will take their talents and multiply them. Some people realize that they have a gift, but it starts out with, like maybe you like pottery, right? You kind of like molding clay. I wonder if I can make money with pottery. And then you start expanding your mindset. Oh my God, there's got to be a way to make money. Sure. Doing this. And then everybody has the potential to make a lot of money. I wish we would teach this in school, Manny. I wish that 2 things should be taught in school. One is how to be an entrepreneur so you don't have to get a job, so we're not conditioned that way. Yep. And the other one is to manage your finances. Yep. I wish those 2 things were taught. If we were taught to manage our finances and know that upon graduating at 18, I can go to a job or college rather, or I can start my own business. Yep. I mean, imagine that to me, that's full empowerment. Yeah, but they'll never do that. They can start. Yeah. That's what I want. The system will never allow for that, right? So you almost have to take it as parents. Now, I'm a brand new parent with I'm an almost 9-month-old baby. Yep. We already know our son is going to be homeschooled, and we're going to teach him what we know is going to help him become the best possible human being he can, and not be subject to being away from us, where he's going to have to go to a school for 8 hours a day and hear somebody else's opinion on life. Maybe they tell him he's dumb or he's not good enough or he's stupid or whatever that is. I'm not saying that that's how teachers are, by no means, but it's a possibility. And the trust that I'm putting onto somebody else that he's going to be spending most of his upbringing with,
to determine and dictate who he's going to become, that's just not happening on our watch, right? So we've already made that decision.
And that is the privilege that you are providing him.
Interesting.
That is the head start that you are giving him.
Yeah.
Right?
It's true,
and so
man.
we stand on the shoulders of giants. In this case, he stands on your shoulders as parents, right?
Yeah.
And that's why, again, when I use the word privilege, I mean it in that context, that to some extent, we all have some privilege.
Right.
Right. And if you're born without privilege, then again, the privilege you have there is of adversity that tempers you into being a better person and stronger.
Yeah. So obviously you're people that if you haven't seen Vic speak, probably one of the top 3 best speakers in the world. Literally.
Thank you,
I saw a Facebook post out there once where I think it was Patrick Bet David. We talked about him a lot. Asked like, who's the best speaker out there that you've ever seen? And sure enough, I saw your name. I'm like, of course it's on there, right? I was taking a peek there. But one of the things that I think makes you so good at that is where I want to kind of transition to now. It's something that obviously I think the whole world can do a better job of, but in the spirit of skills building and development, while we wrap this thing up in the next 25 minutes, because I know it's like 9 o'clock over there. I'll keep your ass all night. Just kidding. Is your storytelling ability. Yeah. And I remember when we were here in Vegas once and I was in the back, you were doing a big event for a big company. We were down in the green room and then you were getting ready to introduce Andy Grammer. We're floating around the MGM and I said, I need help with storytelling. You're like, all right, Cabron, tell me a story. I'm like, blah, blah, blah. You're like, shut the fuck up. Just like, stop talking. That was your response. Like, that's not it. And then we were just in Orlando a few months ago and I was like, hey, you're like, you lost me. Remember, I was practicing. I'll tell you the story about my wallet, man. By the way, there's my wallet again, right there. Right? Nice you're like, wallet, dude. So anyway, where I'm going with that, man, is I would love for you to share with us how to be a better storyteller, because I think that is a skill that a lot of people would love for whatever, man. Sitting around the chimney at Christmas time, cooking some marshmallows, whether they're outside burning some fire or just at the dinner table or on stage or in their podcast or a business meeting. I don't know, Vic. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's comedians hate. Like my favorite comedian is Bill Burr. Like he's my number one guy, Bill Burr. Right. And the reason I love Bill Burr, if you haven't listened to Bill Burr, you should listen to Bill Burr or watch him rather on Netflix. Bill Burr has a way of storytelling that even I have to bow to, going, oh, that's so good. But he uses a lot of the same techniques I use, right? I just use him as this guy does it. Like I said, everybody has their own style. So I never would try to mimic him, but I love the way he sets stories up. And so he was asked about, how he develops stories. And he goes, I hate when people ask me that question. And he was really serious about it. Like I hated it and I understood what he meant by it because when people say, well, Victor, how do you build a story? And it's like, man, the hardest part is that sometimes it comes to you in the middle of the night while you're taking a shower or something, because something happened. You didn't think about it much. And then like a beautiful mind, floating objects, floating abstractions come to you and you're like, oh, I can make this story. You're like, oh. And so for example, my latest story that I came up with was, I was with a friend named Ken. We were having some coffee over Starbucks. Make a long story short, I come out and this little guy tries to sell me some Cub Scout stuff, right? And I remember he sold it. I was like, man, that caramel popcorn, that's my jam, right? And it was like $20. I'm like, $20, right? That's a lot of money. And so that happened, and I tried to get out of it I said, well, I don't have any cash. And he's like, well, my father takes credit cards, right? I'm like, oh, sorry, I can't get out of this one, right? So I wound up buying this bag of Cracker Jacks. And I remember he said, would you like to buy 2 instead? I go, no, not really. I said, I'll just take 1. And I walked away, right? And I said, oh, that little guy tried to upsell me, right? That was it. That's what happened, right? Yeah. I turned that into a story about upselling because then I changed the story a little bit. So this is like the construction of a story. So then I set the story up like this. And the only point that changed is really the end, because I wanted to make it an upselling story because I needed an upselling story. So that was the other thing. I needed a reason for the story. I needed something to fill this. Remember that little guy tried to sell me something? Yeah, but he just asked me, I said, well, what if I make him smarter? Like a little wise ass, And I said, that might be funny, actually. And so the story now goes like this. And it's not going to sound funny because I'm just telling the story, stating it. But it's like, same thing. I'm sitting there with my friend Ken. I come out the door, and all of a sudden, this young boy goes, how you doing today? And I said, well, rule of reciprocity. Remember, I'm trying to educate at the same time as I'm telling my story. You feel like you need to respond. I said, good. I said, it's going good. And I said, and yours? He goes, it's going good. He says, would you like to support me and my cause? I said, that's interesting. Because then I started breaking it apart. He said, me. He didn't say support the Cub Scout. He said support me, because studies have shown that if you say support me, you'll get more donations, right? And I said, well, okay, I'm caught now. I said, well, okay, let me take a look. And so I do the whole scenario. And then I said, caramel corn, that's my jam. How much is that one? $20. I'm like, ooh, that's a lot of money, right? I said, I don't have any cash. He goes, that's okay. My father, I start joking that my father takes cash. And his father looks over sheepishly going, yeah. And then I start adding layers to it. I said, now his father knows that I'm caught. He gives me that look like, dude, I feel bad for you, but you're screwed type of thing, right? And so the little kid keeps going. And I said, fine, okay. And as I hand my credit card, this part I made up, because now this is part where you try to make it interesting. As I hand my credit card and I say, as it is in flight, en route to the father, the kid says to me, you should buy 2. And I said, and I do this gesture, what? And I said, at this point, now the kid is challenging me, a sales trainer. This kid is trying to upsell. So I create some drama around it, right? Because everybody wants to hear a little drama. And so I create the little drama around it. I said, what do you mean? And so I said, I push him. I said, what'd you say? And he said, I think you should buy 2. And I could tell he's not backing off. He's got the look. He's not backing down. So I start adding layers to the story, right? Now, again, this didn't really happen. I just add these layers and he's not backing down. And then I said, all right. And then inner dialogue goes, okay, I'm going to really challenge this kid. And here's what I said to him. I said, all right, tell me why I would want to buy a second one. Because at this point, I'm thinking in my head, there's no way he's got anything for me. He goes, it's simple. I said, what's simple? And he gives me the answer. So you don't have to share. And my brain locks up. He says, if you buy 2, you can keep one for yourself and give the other one to somebody else so you don't have to share. And at that point, I realized I was defeated. And I remember I gave the credit card to the guy, said, I'll take 2. And the kid ends the conversation by going, good call. Like sticking the knife in me, twisting it like he won the whole conversation. So it was a small incident like that I said, how could I make this a funny story? But yet now I get to the end because I use something called the SPA method, story, point, then application, right? So I tell that story. My point is that anybody can learn how to upsell even this Cub Scout. Now, the application piece, right? That was the point. Here's the application piece. And then I turn it around to the crowd. I said, how many times have you let a customer walk out the door without even asking if they would want something else, if they would want to add something? And by not doing that, you did them a disservice and obviously yourself a disservice. So that's, I use the SPA method, story, point, application. Here's a story. Here's the point I'm trying to make. Here's how it applies to you. And so that's how I try to build stories. So stories are hard to find because you have to find original stories and you have to create these original stories. Because the last thing you want to do as a speaker is use some of these stories that everybody else uses, like the Colonel Sanders Kentucky Fried Chicken story, the Thomas Edison light bulb story. There's so many of these stories that I've seen speakers do stories, Manny, that I could finish it for them.
Sure.
Because I know where they're going. When we tell stories, or at least when I tell stories, I got to keep them guessing. Where's he going with this? That's the drama, right? That's the anticipation piece. That's when the dopamine hits the brain. Dopamine is all about excitement, anticipation. Where is he going with this? That intrigue. And if you can develop a story like that and then deliver it with the right body language, gesture, voice, intonations and inflections, man, people just respond to that. And then if you give them the content, the application piece, they say, oh, thank you. I learned a lesson from that.
So probing, yeah. So I look fantastic because I've kind of copied your SPA approach and tried it in practice. What I have found difficult is that part you said there in the middle, Vic, which is the intrigue on the storytelling part and adding different layers and dramas and not losing people, right? Because I would think you're telling a good story there, but then you get off into left field and you're way off track, and you're like, oh God, and then people are gone. Like, oh, I lost. So
there's that line: focus on the road, avoid the scenery. Focus on the road, avoid the scenery, which means is don't throw in superfluous information. Like I could have said, there's this young kid, he's wearing a green outfit, got one of those little yellow things around his neck. You could tell he's about 7 years old. Don't need to tell you that. I just can say 9-year-old kid. That's all I need to say. I don't have to describe him. right? And too many people describe it sometimes, and they add, again, that's the scenery. Focus on the road. You want to get to the point quickly. And by the way, this takes, what you can do is through iteration, just going back and reviewing the story. You tell the story once, you go, oh, it seemed a little clunky and long.
Sure.
Let me change it. I mean, I walk through the house when I'm trying to figure something out, like talking to myself and doing gestures. My wife just ignores me now because she knows what's going on. But I'm trying to work it through so that when I deliver it, it's flawless. Like I even work on the gestures. I'll be like, okay, do this. Like for example, here's a simple gesture. Revenues are increasing, right? This is what speakers do. Revenues are increasing. What I just did is wrong because from your point, it's backwards. I got to do this. Revenues are increasing.
Yep.
Right? So you got to think about things like this.
Yeah.
Like how you do the gestures even matter on stage.
Sure. So from that, it sounds like it's almost like spend an enormous amount of time, not literally, but more time. What is the old? Was it Abe Lincoln sharpening the saw? I don't know if that's right.
3 times, the axe.
Sharpening the axe.
Story, it's the story about the 2 axemen.
Yeah.
Two lumberjacks. One was what is it? Took time to sharpen the axe. The other one just kept chopping. It was dull. It wasn't doing anything. Right. But I think you sharpen the axe. I think the sharpening the axe piece. By the way, getting a good story, a good 3 to 5, 7-minute story, no more than 7. Remember, the longer the story, the bigger the payoff has to be. So I try to keep it within the 5-minute range. Just to get a good 5-minute story takes a lot of work and effort, like a good one. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
And so you were right in saying that, it takes a while. You really got to work. It's a lot of work to get that 5-minute story. And by the way, anybody can do a 5-minute story. If you're listening, go, I come up with 5 minutes. Yeah. Try to make it 5 minutes and interesting and engaging and have people at the edge of the seat going, where the hell is he going?
Right.
That's what gets you to the next level in terms of speaking.
And so your feedback there is to really study the comedians and other people that are seasoned professionals. Like that's a great place to.
Comedians are the best people to study. Yeah, like I said, even Dave Chappelle, the way he sets up some of this story. There's one he sets up, you should find it. He has a goldfish bowl, and every time he has an idea or a phrase, he writes the phrase down, right? Like, I kicked the bottle over the fence. And he'll write, I kicked the bottle over the fence. And once in a while, he challenges himself to pick one of those phrases out of the bowl that he put in there and then create a story around that to land on that phrase. It's fascinating the way he was doing, and he did it too. He did it live. It was really fascinating. He didn't say kick the bottle over the wall. He said something that was a little vulgar, so I can't repeat it here, but it was really great because he said, okay, I plucked it out, and he goes, that's a phrase. And then what I do is I take that phrase, and he says, I work a story around it. And then he just jumps into this other monologue, and you think he's forgotten about it. And then 5-10 minutes later, he lands on that line, and you're like, oh, I didn't see that one coming. So there's an art to creating a story.
There's an art, man. But is this any science? Any science there too, as far as?
I think I think it's really art. I mean, storytelling, I think, is pure art. Now, the artistic part comes in how we get from A to Z, right? And because it's all subjective. And the art also comes in how you decide to visualize. In other words, what body language you use to kind of give the gestures, right? And then all that has to be worked out. But I think to me, it's mostly art. If there's science in, I guess the logic of the story should have some type of logical conclusion, right? But I think it's a 90-10 rule on this one. It's 90% art. It's how you deliver it. Yeah. And so when I hear a compelling story, I go, now, why did that hold me? Like, why did that hold me? Like, I think we talked about this. Simon Sinek wrote the book Find Your Why. I was watching his presentation. I forgot which one it is, but he's like standing like plain clothes, right? He just wears shirts, just business casual. And he's got this flip chart. And he just barely uses the flip chart. 45 minutes go by just like that. And I realize I'm at the end of this guy's presentation. I'm like, what just happened to me? Right? Because I'm totally into this guy, right? And by the way, he's not even moving much. Doesn't have a lot of gesturing. Right? He's just a great storyteller. So I had to watch it again. And I think I've now watched it 3 times just to try to understand what he does. And he uses his boyish charms, his personality and delivery style to just make it engaging. And he's constantly cycling you through these different stories. But the way he does it is just amazing. But comedians are the best source of storytelling, in terms of teaching, learning from them. I would definitely, but check out Bill Burr. He's got a lot of specials, man. He's really good.
Yeah. Check out Victor Antonio when you get a chance, guys. That's the man right
Yep.
there. All right, man, let's land this plane, buddy. Let's bring this thing home and get ourselves some nice rest tonight. So the last thing, Vic, I think just to bring this thing home is two things. I'm going to ask you where we can go and find you and all those goodies here in a second. And then I'm going to ask you about the brand itself. But the last thing is, man, you're wise. You're in touch. You've lived a lot of life. You've got a lot of fantastic experiences traveling, speaking in some of the biggest audiences, traveling to the most exotic places, still doing what you love. You had a TV show at one point, man. You were on TV. Like, dude, you've lived a great life, like a really good life, and you're at peace, man. That's something we talk about all the time. You're happy with where you're at. You're not trying to build this $100 million company. Like, you know your zone. You know that you're living it every day. What can you say backwards to people that are listening right now about what life has ahead of them, and maybe what not to stress about, or what to just let go in the woes bag, or what to anticipate, or something that, you know, is more on top of what you've already said, very wisdom driven and then deep in that sense, where maybe they live a happier life because of it. Maybe they live with less stress or more peace, or the thing that somebody's after, or whatever that might be, man. I'm wondering what you've got there.
That's a big one. I remember years ago, I heard this phrase, obstacles are those things you see when you take your eyes off the goal, right? I've always loved that phrase. Obstacles, if you really break it down and think about it, obstacles are those things you see when you take your eyes off the goal. This gets back to once you go all in, right, and you're focused on that, it's almost like looking at something, right? And like if I'm standing on one side of the room, like think of a big conference room, right? Bunch of chairs and everything, right? And I told you, Manny, I need you to get from that corner of the room to that other corner of the room, right? Now, you'll start walking towards that. Obviously, there is no straight line. You'll have to go around chairs and tables, and right? I mean, you'll have to kind of you zigzag your way. And you'll zigzag your way, but you're constantly looking at what? The corner, where you have to go. And I've often thought that was an interesting analogy for what successful people do. They just keep focused on where they need to be going. The tables and the chairs in the way are just obstacles that you just need to get around. You got to figure your way around it. And I think that's happened to me. I mean, I got too many failures, right? Too many things that didn't work out. That was just an obstacle. Okay, well, that didn't work out. Let's try something else. Let's try this. Let's try that. Hey, I think if I do these types of video, this will work. Damn it, that didn't work. Okay, well, I'm having my own event. Let's see if we can get a lot of people in the room. Damn, only one person showed up. Damn, that didn't work out well. Let's not do that again, right? So, but I kept saying to myself, but yeah, I want to be over there. I want to get to that corner. I got to get to that spot. I just got to keep moving. So even though I wasn't going straight line towards it as the bird flies, right? I was actually moving in that direction. I wasn't, like I said, the line is messy to get to success. And I think that's the big message, that if once you know, again, once you take your raw gift and you go, I think I got something. And you'll know it, man. You'll know it. You'll start feeling it. Then you start playing with it. You try it. And then this one really seems like it's going to work. And then all the obstacles starts kicking in, right? And when I came up as a speaker, you know, I couldn't give it away for free. I mean, I told people I'd come over and speak for free. They're like, well, who are you? All right. And then eventually I started charging, you know the story. I started charging like $250 when I got my first one, $250 or whatever it was. I was like, oh my God, I'm making money now for 1 hour. I'm like, good. And then I kept moving the price up, right? But in my mind, I kept trying different things. I've tried so many things, Manny. Like even in this studio that I built during the pandemic, I can take you to my closet back here and I can show you all the crap equipment I bought that didn't work, right? That I've wasted money on. Some people would look at that as failure. I'm like, well, that didn't work. But guess what? That worked. So it worked out. And so if you're sitting here listening or watching, again, that phrase, obstacles are those things you see when you take out your eyes off the goal. If you got something, to tie it all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, when you got something pulling you into the future, the past doesn't seem to matter anymore. But if you keep bringing stuff from the past, well, last time I tried this, I just didn't work. Yeah, I got it. That was back then. That's a different context. You need new content, right? That whole thing. And I think if you can just keep that in mind, this is where I want to go. And if you get there and it isn't what you want, don't castigate yourself. Just say, all right, now we know we don't want to do that. Because at the end of life, let's fast forward this thing. If you ask me right now, if I have any regrets, I literally would say no.
Mm.
Right? No, because I'm good. Because even with all my mistakes, all my things I shouldn't have done, I went this way when I should have gone that way, invested in this when I should have invested that. I look at where I'm at today. I'm like, I'm good, man. I'm really good. I'm really good. Right?
Yeah.
And you know me that I could make more money, but I don't want to live that lifestyle, right? I'm all about quality of life, right? So I've decided not to look at what other people have, and I focus on what I want because I'm all about me.
Yeah.
And everybody listening and watching, it should be about you.
Mm.
So again, let's stop pulling the stuff from the back and what's in the past. I get it, man. It's traumatic. Why don't we find something that just compels us towards the future? Yeah. And then when you run into an obstacle, say, yeah, Victor said this was going to happen. That's what I need you to say to the show. Yeah, he said it was going to happen. Of course, you're going to bump into things. You're going to lose money. Yeah, you're going to lose time. People are going to tell you, why do it? It's not worth it. Give up. Yeah. But again, people who give me advice are usually very unhappy with their lives. That's what I've learned, man. I've learned that there's a lot of naysayers and dream killers out there. Yeah. So avoid them at all costs because they're not happy. And remember that phrase, Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is a very powerful word because it means that good feeling you get when something bad happens to somebody else. Like you ever see somebody get into an accident, you go, I'm glad it wasn't me.
Yeah.
Now, how does this apply to this? A lot of people don't want to see you succeed because how you will make them feel. Because if you succeed and you were raised under the same condition, but you made it, they now have no excuse for why they didn't make it. Yeah. And sometimes, like the bucket of crabs, they'll try to pull you down with them. And I see this a lot. I think the sooner you stop listening to other people, just stop and just focus on what you want, man. That's the beginning. Find that gift, polish it, move in that direction. It'll happen.
Yeah.
But it won't happen overnight.
Yeah, of course. No, the way you said that too. I mean, timing of a message is so important, and I've said this a million times. Without opening up a whole nother direction in the conversation. What we talked about the other day with doing something and then it expanding and emerging off of that first thought or something said. We always talk about this all the time, a million different ways. It could be that one time said this way that sinks in with that person, right? That's what you always challenge yourself to do.
It hits bottom with some people.
Yeah, and so what you said about the obstacles and the goals, it's like for some reason that today really stood out to me, right? Yeah. Because I'm in a season right now where I'm like pushing forward, but I'm catching obstacles on the left and right, and I'm like, God darn it, focus on the goal. Obstacles will get away, right? Just focus on the goal. And so that's profound for me, man. Always a blessing, always a great time with you, man. Last thing, what does always on the grow mean to you?
Always on the grow means continuous improvement. That's the obvious one, right? But I think it's also it's not about more. For me, it's always about less also. In other words, always on the grow is, the positive side, which I'm sure is how you meant it, is like, always be growing, right? Always be growing. But I think you got to turn inward and say, there's a lot of things I don't want. I mean, it's funny because, we always talk about the law of addition. I want this. I want that. I want that. But there's always the power in the law of subtraction. You know what? I don't need that. Don't really want that. Don't really want that. And when you do that, when you can reduce your wants, I'm telling you, magic begins to happen because you can live with less, do with less, and have less. And by the way, that does not impact your quality of life. It actually makes it more streamlined. Now, I'll give you an example. My neighbor just bought a beautiful boat. Oh, you should see this thing. It's gorgeous, beautiful speedboat. In my mind, love to have it. Guess what? I don't want it.
Yeah.
Because I know what comes with that. And too often, mimetics, we see something, we think we want it. And so on the grow means obviously growing, always learning. I try to read 1 or 2 books every month, right? I always try to create new content. You know me, I'm always about creating content. That's the grow piece. But I'm also trying to find a way to live a minimalist life and to minimize what I need or what my wants are. Because if I can increase what I'm good at and then reduce my wants, my mental profit margin is going to be very high.
Yeah. Wow, man. I love the reverse effect of doing or getting rid of things you don't need or wants in that case. That's powerful. Yeah, man. Listen, brother, where can we get you? Where can we find you, man? I know you got 2 of the greatest sales channels in the world, literally, on YouTube and on the podcast. But where do you want to direct people here?
So if you want to listen to podcasts, the Sales Influence podcast, just type in Sales Influence. If you go on YouTube, Sales Influence. If you just want to track me down anywhere on social media, just type in Victor Antonio. I'm all over the place.
Cool. Yeah.
Yep.
One of the best in the world, ladies and gentlemen, at sales, at communication and speaking. And I've had the great honor of having this guy be a mentor of mine for, golly, seems like forever now, man. I mean, 6-7 years we're going on, brother. So
That could be
always,
years.
always an honor to be in your presence, man. We finally caught a conversation that we had. By the way, we have a bunch of conversations, just not recorded.
Yep.
So I'm glad we were able to
you
bring
go.
some of the magic to the table here. And
Thank you, man.
let Vic offer his genius, brother. God bless you, man. You know I love you to death, and we'll be in touch here shortly, man.
Thank you, brother.
Go enjoy your night with your wife.
I will do, man.
Adios. And,
Are we
and your
good?
baby, brother. Yeah, and your baby, man. We're good.
Oh, yeah, my grandchild.
Your grandchild. Yeah, brother.
Scott, Sebastian, thank you very much, guys. Later.
Man, appreciate you, brother. Be good.
Bye.
Adios.